Good evening, everybody. My name is Peter Rocco. I'm part of the contracting team supporting the Bureau of Land Management in their consideration of Southern California Edison's proposed Ivanpah-Control project. I look forward to spending this meeting with you this evening. The BLM has directed me to go over some logistical matters at the start of the meeting. So here we go. This meeting will be recorded, transcribed, and posted on the BLM's e-planning website. Please be aware that any personal information you share today will be public. Official scoping comments will not be collected at today's meeting. The Bureau of Land Management will give you guidance and recommendations on where to submit comments several times over the course of today's meeting. Attendees will be muted and your video cameras turned off when you join the meeting. Any questions you have will be held until the question and answer portion of the meeting. You want to familiarize yourself with the Zoom tools. You want to look at the bottom of your Zoom window. There's a couple of options there for you. Starting off on the left-hand side, you'll see audio settings. That's where you can test your microphone if you plan to ask a question later in the meeting. It's where you can test your speakers as well. You can also switch your microphone and speakers if your current setup isn't working for you. And finally, you can also switch to phone audio if you'd like to watch this recording on your, this presentation on your computer, but use your phone to listen and speak later in the meeting. If you do switch to phone audio, it will prompt you with a phone number and a passcode to use. You'll want to remember to turn off the microphone on your computer as well as the speakers to avoid any feedback. Further to the right, you'll see a question and answer tool. That's where you can post any technical questions to the BLM and contracting team. It's where you can register to ask a question during the question and answer period. It's also where you can post a question that we can ask on your behalf during the question and answer period. If you're only calling in and you want to register to ask a question, you'll press *9 on your phone. That'll raise your hand. We'll add you to the question queue and then lower your hand. And we'll give those instructions again later in the meeting. And finally, there's a live transcript that you can turn on to see a transcript of today's meeting. We'll do our best to help you with any technical difficulties, but please be aware we are unable to help with any phone issues. And finally, the Bureau of Land Management kindly asks you to refrain from using inappropriate language on today's call. And with that, I'll hand off to the Bureau of Land Management's project manager, Joan Petrovsky. Joan?
Thank you, Peter. And good evening. Hello to everyone. On behalf of the Bureau of Land Management, we would like to welcome you to this public scoping meeting. It's regarding the proposed Ivanpah-Control transmission line project. My name is Joan Petrovsky, and I am a Bureau of Land Management project manager from the California Desert District Office. Before we begin, we have some ground rules for all to follow during this meeting. First, we ask for you to be respectful and kind when listening. Everyone is encouraged to participate. This is a public presentation, not a debate. We wish to hear from you from many points of view. We frequently hear new and valuable information that can help us identify concerns and inform our decisions. A copy of this PowerPoint presentation is available online at our BLM e-planning website for the Ivanpah-Control project. As Peter mentioned, this meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the BLM NEPA e-planning website shortly after its recording. Next, Peter. Our goals for the scoping meeting is to share project information and to increase your awareness regarding the proposed Southern California Edison transmission line rating remediation project. This is a starting point for the BLM to involve you, the public. The BLM is the lead federal agency for this environmental analysis. The purpose and need by the BLM is to process an application filed by the Southern California Edison, or SCE. SCE is responding to a notice to comply with state-mandated major transmission line regulations. SCE must improve their transmission lines' stability and reliability. The Ivanpah-Control lines were built in the 1920s through the 1960s. The existing lattice towers are well over 100 years old. SCE needs to address wildland fire prevention, as well as to avoid blackouts or interruptions to power services. Additionally, the growing Southern California population and our business needs contribute to SCE's requirement towards providing clean and reliable energy. For details about the Ivanpah-Control proposal, please go to our e-planning website and review the plan of development, or called a POD, for it contains details about the proposed transmission line construction. During this presentation, you will hear from our BLM project panelists and about the anticipated key resource issues that we are identifying in this process. Following panelist presentations, there will be a public question and answer time. Finally, we will wrap up by providing you with information how to submit your written comments and where our project e-planning website may be found. Next. As you can see from this slide, this is a high-level overview of the project participants. The BLM, as mentioned, is the NEPA lead and is responsible for authorizations on public lands. The CPUC, or the California Public Utilities Commission, is the CEQA lead, and they are responsible for issuing an applicable state permit. And SCE is the proponent for this action. As you can see, multiple cooperating agencies are involved with the BLM. Each of them provide technical expertise and may have specific decision-making authority for their area of jurisdiction. Over 25 tribes have been invited and are participating in our ongoing government-to-government consultation efforts. Representatives from the CPUC and SCE are attending today in a listening capacity. They are not on the panel. Their roles are to listen intently and take notes of the issues important to you. Any direct questions for them will not be answered today. However, we can provide you with the avenue where to submit your questions directly to CPUC or SCE for a response later in this presentation. Next. All right, here's an overview of our team and their respective role for this project. As you can see, I'm the project manager and lead of this application and taking it through an environmental impact statement. And with that, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists. First off, may I introduce Reagan Watt. Reagan?
Thanks, Joan. My name is Reagan Watt. I'm with the Bureau of Land Management California Desert District Office, and I am the Planning and Environmental Coordinator, or the NEPA lead for this project. And from here, I'll pass it to Matt Bristol.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Matt Bristol. I'm a wildlife biologist working for the California Desert District. And I'll pass it off to Arlene.
Good evening, everyone. I'm the Bureau of Land Management Cultural and Tribal Lead for this project. Welcome, and I pass it on to Mona.
Hi, I'm Ramona Daniels. I am an outdoor recreation planner and visual resource lead for this project. And I pass it off to Peter.
Thanks, Mona. I'm Peter Rocco. I'm part of the contracting team. I serve as a communication coordinator. I'll hand it back to Reagan Watt for the next part of our meeting.
Thanks, Peter. So the Ivanpah-Control line shown here spans approximately 358 miles between the Ivanpah substation and the control substation in Southern California. The line is composed of 5 geographic segments spanning Inyo, Kern, and San Bernardino County, as well as the city of Barstow. The 5 geographic segments are denoted as 1, 2, 3N, or 3 North, 3S, or 3 South, and 4. The proposed design includes mitigation designed to reduce impacts. 40 CFR 1528.1S, a section of the Code of Federal Regulations for Protection of the Environment, defines mitigation as measures that avoid, minimize, or compensate for effects caused by a proposed action or alternatives, as described in an environmental document or record of decision, and have a nexus to those effects. While NEPA requires consideration of mitigation, it does not mandate the form or the adoption of the mitigation. Mitigation includes avoiding the impacts by not taking a certain action or parts of an action, minimizing impacts by limiting the degree or magnitude of the action and its implementation, rectifying the impact by repairing, rehabilitating, or restoring the affected environment, reducing or eliminating the impact over time by preservation and maintenance operations during the life of the action, and compensating for the impacts by replacing or providing substitute resources or environments. Where applicable, these types of measures have been incorporated into the proposed action to reduce potential impacts associated with the project's implementation. Next slide, please. Segment 1 is an 126-mile segment extending from the control station through Hawi and Koso to the Inyo current substation. The subtransmission line for this segment would be rebuilt in a new alignment adjacent to but outside of the existing alignment. Approximately 1,161 existing structures would be removed and 905 new structures would be installed. Segment 2 is a 48-mile segment which extends from the Inyo current substation through Randsburg to the Kramer Junction substation. The subtransmission line for this segment would be rebuilt in a new alignment adjacent to the existing alignment, but within the existing right-of-way. Approximately 390 transmission structures would be removed and 342 new structures would be installed. Segment 3 is a 44-mile line split into 2 segments, 3 north or 3N and 3 south or 3S. Segment 3N extends from the Kramer to the Coolwater substation, and segment 3S extends from Kramer through Tortilla to the Coolwater substation. The subtransmission line for this segment would be reconductored, and some existing structures would be replaced with tubular steel poles and wood multi-pole structures, as well as steel and wood H-frames. Approximately 85 existing structures would be removed and 87 new structures would be installed. Segment 4 is a 96-mile segment extending from the Coolwater substation to the Ivanpah substation. The existing subtransmission line for this segment would be derated to operate at a lower amperage and would include the installation of optical groundwater. To remediate the remaining discrepancies, some existing subtransmission structures would be replaced with steel and wood H-frames. Approximately 85 structures would be removed, 87 new structures would be installed, and 83 structures would be modified. Here you can see a snapshot of the Ivanpah-Control website where you'll find details about the Ivanpah-Control transmission line project. A general description of the proposed action and navigable map may be found on the home page. To the left side, where you can click to look at documents, plans, and maps for this project, including the plan of development, which has more detailed information about the project, which is under documents. Also on this website is a comment button feature in green, participate now, where you can submit comments directly. If you are unable to access the documents on the internet, you may stop by any local BLM office to obtain copies of the notice of intent and to review copies of all the documents posted here. The purpose for this federal action is to evaluate the proposed action and related impacts, and the need is to respond to a right-of-way application for the Ivanpah-Control 115 kilovolt transmission line on Bureau of Land Management administered lands for construction, operation, and maintenance. The need is established by Bureau of Land Management's responsibility under the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, also known as FLPMA. The applicant for this action is Southern California Edison, and their purpose for the project is to ensure compliance with California Public Utility Commission's General Order 95 and the National Electrical Reliability Corporation reliability standards. Their proposed action is to implement engineering solutions to remediate approximately 2,950 discrepancies along the Ivanpah-Control alignment, continue to provide safe and reliable electrical service, meet the project needs while minimizing environmental impacts, and to design and construct the physical components of the project in conformance with industry and/or Southern California and Edison's approved engineering, design, and construction standards for substation and subtransmission system projects. On the screen, you'll see a list of the authorities, regulations, and policies that we're following. Before BLM can authorize any new activities on public lands, the BLM must evaluate the proposed action and determine whether the impacts affect the quality of the human environment. The environmental review process informs the decision-making process and the decision maker. The information gathering process allows the BLM to review compliance with other laws. Next slide, please. The National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, of 1969, under which the project will be evaluated, was signed into law on January 1st, 1970. Although the law was signed in 1970, the regulations for implementing NEPA and guidance for protection of the human environment are periodically updated to account for things such as environmental changes, administration priorities, and new technologies. Recently, the 40 CFR 1500 regulations were updated in 2020 and 2022. We're currently here in the public scoping period for the project, which occurs after the publication of the Notice of Intent to prepare an environmental impact statement in the Federal Register. This notice announces that an environmental impact statement will be prepared and initiates the public scoping process for identifying issues and potential alternatives for consideration in the environmental impact statement, or EIS. Okay, so what is an environmental impact statement? An environmental impact statement is prepared to analyze and disclose effects of a proposed action on the environment and to consider reasonable alternatives and mitigation measures. Like I mentioned before, we're currently in the scoping period, which is the opportunity for the public to help agencies identify relevant issues and potential alternatives. Scoping occurs early in the NEPA process. The BLM anticipates analyzing the following key resource areas, which will be discussed by resource specialists throughout this presentation. Disturbance in areas of critical environmental concern, which I'll discuss on the next slide. Special status species, wildlife and vegetation species, which will be discussed by Matt Bristol, our wildlife and threatened, endangered, and sensitive species lead. Native American and cultural resources, which will be discussed by Arlene Garcia-Erbst, our cultural and tribal lead, and visual resources, which will be discussed by Mona Daniels, our visual resources lead. This project crosses over 20 areas of critical environmental concern. These are the 4 ACECs that pose the most challenge to mitigate due to existing level of disturbance: the Olancha Greasewood, the Kronese Basin, the Superior Kronese, and Shadow Valley 2. BLM follows processes prescribed by the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan's conservation and management actions to minimize impacts to areas of critical environmental concern and to mitigate disturbances over each ACEC or area of critical environmental concern specific disturbance cap. BLM has database tracking systems to track cumulative disturbance to ACECs across all projects managed by the BLM. I'll now turn it over to Matt Bristol, the wildlife and threatened, endangered, and sensitive species lead, to discuss biological impacts.
Thank you, Reagan. I will now go over some of the wildlife resources found in the project area. During the 2017 and 2018 surveys along the project alignment, 16 special status wildlife species were observed, and the desert tortoise was the only federally listed species observed. Critical habitat for the desert tortoise also overlaps the project area. 8 BLM sensitive species were observed, including the northern sagebrush lizard, golden eagle, bald eagle, burrowing owl, Swainson's hawk, gilded flicker, bank swallow, and desert bighorn sheep. Mojave ground squirrel was not observed during these surveys, but we expect it to occur in the project area. Now we'll look at some of the botanical resources found in the project area. 24 special status plant species were observed during surveys, and 11 BLM sensitive species were observed, including the parish's popcorn flower, red rock poppy, Barstow woolly sunflower, desert cymopteris, and Mojave minodora. These species are some of the most abundant based on the previous surveys. And there, from left to right, you can see photos of the sunflower, cymopteris, and minodora. 31 sensitive natural communities were observed in the project area. Joshua Tree Woodland occupies the largest area at 253 acres. And most of this area is found in segment 4 around Halloran Summit, where project impacts will be less compared to other segments. Approximately 180 acres of riparian and wetland vegetation types were observed in the project area. And most of these areas occur in the Owens Valley, but also keep in mind these include desert wash woodlands, which can be found throughout. Next slide. And now I'll go over some examples of how impacts to biological resources would be mitigated. Qualified biologists would be on site during construction to implement mitigation measures. Biologists would flag burrows and sensitive plants so they could be avoided during construction. Topsoil may also be salvaged in some areas, along with cactus and yucca. And the photo on the left shows a salvaged Mojave yucca from another SCE project in the Desert District. Moving on to minimization. An example of this is drive and crush as a construction method. Drive and crush is when construction vehicles and equipment simply drive over vegetation instead of grading the area. This helps keep the roots of shrubs intact and minimizes impacts to topsoil. And the photo on the right shows a structure in segment 3N where drive and crush was implemented. Lastly, habitat restoration and land acquisition would be required to compensate for project impacts. For example, in desert tortoise critical habitat, the project proponent would be required to compensate for impacts at a 5:1 ratio. So for every 1 acre impacted, 5 acres of habitat would need to be acquired, restored, or enhanced. And now I'll pass it off to Arlene, who will go over cultural resources. Thank you.
Three special studies were conducted in support of the Ivanpah-Control project cultural compliance. These include an archaeological study, a study focused on the human-built environment, which are historical structures, and an ethnographic summary centered primarily on local tribal units. The largest lift of these was the archaeological investigation. First, a record search for the project area plus a 1-mile buffer was conducted at the appropriate federal, state, and private repositories. Next, an intensive Class 3 pedestrian survey of the project area of potential effects and related areas was conducted in 2019 and 2020. This included nearly 13,000 acres of survey, which encompassed the entire project footprint plus some. Archaeological resources occur along the entire project alignment in various locations and densities. This includes 809 archaeological sites. Of those, 128 sites were already listed on or are recommended for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. An additional 68 sites required more archaeological excavation, and sites were already listed, and artifact analyses, the results of which are being incorporated into the assessment currently. This project has the potential to cause both direct and indirect impacts to archaeological resources. Identified resources will be subject to resource avoidance or protection measures. With these measures, most effects to historic properties can be mitigated or avoided. Despite these efforts, some sites will likely be adversely affected. Where a historic property will be adversely affected, its treatment or mitigation will be addressed during formal consultation with vested tribes and the Office of Historic Preservation. Next slide, please. To aid in BLM decision making related to this project, an ethnographic summary was conducted. That study provided a context for evaluating some archaeological and historical sites and assisted in the identification of tribal groups with Aboriginal homelands within or near the project area, the identification of cultural resources, the evaluation of those resources of importance to the tribes, and the resolution of effects to identified historic properties are all accomplished through consultation with vested tribal governments. This effort is ongoing. Those tribes that were invited to participate in government-to-government consultation are listed here. Some of these governments have been engaged from the beginning of this process and the BLM will continue to seek their perspectives as we move forward. Next slide, please. To identify historic built environment properties located within the area of potential effects, a record search of the respective information centers and land managing agencies was conducted. This was followed by a desktop survey of the historic built environment using Google Earth aerial views, historic aerial imagery, and other available data layers. Resources identified by this effort were then evaluated for their significance and potential to be impacted by project activities. These findings are reported in the confidential Historic Built Environment Report. Historical built resources occur along the project alignment at many locations. Though through avoidance and protection measures, most effects to historical resources or historic properties can be avoided. Although regardless of our efforts, there will be direct and indirect impacts to historical resources that occur along the alignment, since the transmission line itself is an eligible property. And now I hand off to Mona.
Hi there. Well, what is VRM, or Visual Resources? BLM policy requires that all projects be reviewed for their effects on scenic values. This is referred to as Visual Resource Management, or VRM. There are 4 VRM classes, with Class 1 having the highest scenic value, and those lands are usually the most sensitive also. The Ivanpah-Control alignment is contained within a Visual Class 3 and Class 4. There are no Class 1 or Class 2 areas within the project boundaries. Class 3 objective is to partially retain the existing character of the landscape. The level of change to the characteristic landscape should be moderate. Management activities may attract attention, but should not dominate the view of the casual observer. Changes should repeat the basic elements found in the predominant natural features of the characteristic landscape. Class 4 objectives is to provide for management activities which require major modifications of the existing character of the landscape. The level of change to the characteristic landscape can be high. These management activities may dominate the view and be the major focus of viewers' attention. However, every attempt should be made to minimize the impact of these activities through minimal disturbance, proper location, and repeating the basic elements of line, form, color, and texture. Visual simulations were prepared for the project in order to support the impact analysis and illustrate before and after visual conditions in the project area as seen from 40 key observation points, or KOPs. The KOPs represent views where the project would be most visible to the public from sensitive locations such as wild and scenic rivers, wilderness areas, designated scenic roads, recreation sites, views from residential areas, or unique public lands resources such as national monuments or areas of environmental concern. Photographic simulations document changes as seen from the KOPs and provide the basics for eliminating potential visual effects associated with the proposed project. In this slide, you can see a small house in the community of Randsburg, and behind, above the right wall of the structure, is located one of many SCE towers within that town. Next slide, please. Implementation of best management practices would avoid or reduce potential visual impacts associated with this project. How a project blends into the environment through the type of structures, materials, surface treatments, and even the placement of structures are just some of the best management practices used to minimize potential visual effects. A VRM specialist must be familiar with the landscape and be able to imagine changes which may occur to the area during construction and after the project's completion. They must be able to identify both short-term and long-term effects, such as the appearance of work crews along the alignment, staging and working impacts, and stringing sites noticeable to the sensitive viewer, such as residents, motorists, and recreational visitors. The image within this slide are two examples of the same area as seen from different directions. When working in an area where granitic mountains and large skyscapes are present, soft blues, grays, and dark creams can disappear into the landscape better than the darker poles, which are best used to blend into vegetated or timbered areas and mimic the look of old telephone poles. In the lower left northbound image, you can see the arrow pointing to a gray pole immediately next to a dark pole. Which one is your eye drawn to? In the southbound image, the gray pole is directly in front of the driver. However, the eye is still drawn to the darker pole on the right. The three towers are colored in a dark oxide stain and present a strong appearance against the background. Next slide, please. Improving visual resources of a project can be completed by minimizing disturbed areas and conducting restoration through the manipulation of plants and rocks, which blend impacts into the surrounding landscape setting, reducing visual contrast and potential visibility of these areas. Again, the proposed project exists in Visual Resource Management Classes 3 and Class 4 areas and should maintain consistency with those existing classifications, and when possible, make improvements and decisions that trend impacts toward lower class ranges. In this slide, you will see a few examples of replacement structures like those proposed for the project. They could include doled or colorized galvanized steel or other materials. Additionally, they could have non-reflective overhead lines or non-reflective condensers. The proposed action addresses replacing the current lattice structures with an approximately 20-foot taller tubular structure, which would occupy a smaller footprint on the ground. Next slide, please. Construction activity and new poles would be noticeable to local residents, motorists, and recreational visitors. These two slides are an area in Ridgecrest Field Office. The image on the left is as the area appears today, and a visual simulation of what that area could look like is on the right. The simulation helps specialists have an idea of how a project will look following construction. Within the proposed project, the distance between towers will be increased. This is the reason why there is no tower in the foreground of the right image. Additionally, the newer poles have a shorter arm length, thereby pulling the lines closer together and creating the appearance of less vertical overhead lines. It is the goal to have a well-designed project which is consistent with our VRM classes, which minimizes the impacts of visual resources, including both the landscape and the skyscapes within scenic and highly sensitive areas, as well as other unique natural areas. Now I'm going to hand it off to Peter Rocco. Thank you.
And thanks to our panelists for their work on the presentation. We're going to move into the question and answer period of our meeting in a few moments, but first a few logistical matters. We're going to start with questions that were posted when members of the public registered for today's meeting. Then we will move on to questions that were posted to the question and answer tool, the bottom of your screen, as well as any that were requested by someone pressing *9 if they were called in. Any questions that were posted with registration or to the question and answer tool, we will read on behalf of the public. If you are someone who's going to be asking a question verbally, we will call your name and then send you a request to unmute yourself, which you'll have to do on your computer. If you're on your phone, you would press *6 to unmute yourself. If you're asking a question verbally, you'll have 3 minutes to ask your question, at which point I will mute you. Remember, any of your questions will be public. Quickly recapping the audio settings on the lower left-hand side, that's where you can test your microphone if you plan to ask a question or check your speakers. Further to the right, the question and answer tool, that's where you can register to ask a question, or you can post a question for us to ask on your behalf. If you're calling in, again, to raise your hand, you'll press *9. We'll add you to the queue, and then when it's your turn, we'll unmute you and you'll press *6. With that, I'll hand back to Joan for a few other points before we get started.
Thank you, Peter. And I wish to thank our project panelists for their presentations. Before we commence with the question and answer section in just a few moments, on the slide before you is some guidance. Please submit your questions now. Questions to SCE or CPUC, those need to be submitted as written comments. When asking your questions, we ask for one question at a time. We want to ensure that everyone is given an opportunity to inquire. Similar questions previously asked may not be carried forward. And as you can see, questions such as, how do I submit a comment, will be answered in the question and answer tool. The BLM wants to hear from all of you, the public. We manage your public lands. And out of respect for everyone in participating in this forum, we want to hear from you. We will be using the following guidelines. Please be respectful and kind when listening and asking your questions. Everyone is strongly encouraged to participate. When you speak, please state your name and where you live. Please stay within your allotted time frame so that everyone has an opportunity to speak. Please refrain from any profanity. If guidelines are not followed, your microphone will be muted and we will move forward to the next participant. Everyone, we are now about to begin our question and answer time frame, and we ask for your cooperation and patience while Peter, our moderator, brings up the question queue for this portion of the meeting. Please be prepared when your name is called. I just want to let you know that no decision will be made on this project until a range of alternatives, including a no action alternative, has been analyzed and potential adverse effects have been disclosed and appropriate mitigation has been incorporated. We are currently in the public scoping period for this project, and we are looking forward to your public comments to be considered as a part of our analysis. And we welcome you to submit your concerns in writing. Peter, are we ready?
Thank you. There's our question queue. And Valerie, if you could make that a little bit larger, please. Can you have a moment? I want to walk through very briefly what we have on the question queue here. On the top there, row 2, you'll see the names of the panelists who are available to answer your questions. Across row 4, you'll see the information in which you can submit comments to the BLM. That information will be, again, in the presentation in a little bit. Across row 6, you'll see information for the link to the BLM's e-planning website, as well as the link to Southern California Edison's website, as well as the email for Southern California Edison. I'd like to remind folks, if you'd like to ask a question, you can submit it through the question and answer tool. You can submit a question for us to ask on your behalf that way, or you can register to ask a question. You can also press *9 if you're called in, and that will raise your hand and we'll add you to the question queue. All right, starting off with question number 1, we have Rose Wynn, who asked via registration, will this project impact any motorized recreation routes or access to routes during project prep, implementation, or follow-up? And that question will be answered by the BLM's Mona Daniels.
Hi there, Rose. Many of our main recreation routes are actually utility corridors. We will work with the public to make sure that access is kept open when possible and to provide detours also if the need comes up. Each BLM office in the area knows of these sites and are more than willing to assist recreationists plan their activities around the routes and provide them with map layers as well. I hope that helps.
right, next we have a question from Kate Kelly. She has her hand raised. Kate, I'm assuming you'd like to ask a question verbally. I'm going to allow you to talk. And then once I do that, you'll have 3 minutes to ask your question. You should have gotten a request to unmute.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you, Kate.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I'm Kate Kelly. I'm here on behalf of Defenders of Wildlife, and we appreciate both the presentation and the opportunity for scoping session this evening. We note that the comment period covers a period that includes 3 federal holidays, which effectively shortens the comment period by a week. We respectfully request that the comment period be extended to January 13th to accommodate the loss of days during the holiday season. Thank you for your time today, and I appreciate all of your hard work. And that concludes my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. We have no questions lined up at the moment. We'll give folks a few moments, a few minutes to compose any questions they may have. Again, you can raise your hand if you're on the phone by pressing *9, or you can use the question and answer tool to post a question or register to ask a question. All right, we're going to wait about 1 more minute for any questions. Again, you can use the question queue to register to ask a question or post one for us to ask. Or if you're on the phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. All right, thank you, everybody. We're going to move on to the next part of the presentation. Give us just a moment to bring the presentation back up. Joan?
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to those in attendance and the questions you've presented thus far. We do look forward to your comments, your written comments. So on the screen here, you'll see are the next steps and where we are. Before you is the flow chart of our EIS steps. We are here at the beginning with the publication of the Notice of Intent to prepare an Environmental Impact Statement, or EIS. A 45-day comment period has commenced. Following the comment period, all comments will be consolidated and responses prepared. Next, the BLM, with its environmental contractors, will begin to develop alternatives and then preparation of the draft EIS document. The BLM will take great efforts to consider a reasonable range of alternatives. And if you have any ideas or comments on potential alternatives for the IC project, we welcome them in your comments. Our goal is to have the draft EIS available for public review and comment by the late summer of 2023. Following the publication of the draft EIS in the Federal Register, a 90-day comment period will commence. And we strongly invite you, as well as others, to participate when that draft document is made available. And we hope to have public scoping meetings in person, we hope, barring any health or safety issues at that time. Those will be scheduled and published and made available via public media, as well as flyers at our various field offices, public register, and in newspapers and news releases. Finally, we anticipate the release, hopefully, of the final EIS and a decision, a record of decision, to be made by the late summer of 2024. Next slide. As displayed on the screen are the various avenues to submit your substantive comments. We ask that you potentially identify resources, applicable laws, policies, and regulations, or any really reasonably foreseeable actions relevant to the project. Please highlight information, data, or any analysis that the Bureau should look at and consider in our development of alternatives, and considering the impact of the proposed project or its alternatives. Identify, based on factual evidence, please, potential deficiencies in the scope of the analysis or methodology or assumptions proposed for use in the environmental analysis. What would the Bureau of Land Management do with your comments? Well, they'll definitely help us determine significant issues that need to be analyzed and addressed in detail. We will develop a public scoping report with a summary of the scoping efforts and the comments received. In the environmental impact statement, the Bureau of Land Management will present these comments and identify alternatives, information, and the analysis of the BLM's consideration and how they were addressed. And with that, I'll roll it over to Reagan Watt, who will show you around our BLM e-planning website.
Thanks, Joan. So this is just another look at that e-planning website. This is the homepage where you'll find the navigable map, all of the basic info about the project. On the left-hand side is the Documents tab. That's where you'll find the Plan of Development and all other documents available for review at this time. If you click How to Get Involved, that will give you information on how to submit comments and how to submit substantive comments, as Joan previously described. And that Participate Now button below in green is where you would actually submit your comments if you're going to submit them directly through e-planning. As we mentioned, there's also other avenues to submit your comments, either directly to the project email or to a BLM office. And I will hand it back to Joan.
Thanks, Reagan. All right. So here on the screen are the various avenues and how to submit your written comments for consideration. The deadline is January 3rd, 2023. These various paths are available. You can send your comments via email to the project email site shown here. You can go to our e-planning website, and as Reagan mentioned, we have a participate now button that you can punch on in there and input your comments. Other avenues include submittal by fax, as well as good old-fashioned US mail. Your written comments can be sent to our district office and the address shown here. Your public involvement will help us shape our final decision and the uses upon your public lands. Next slide. On the screen here are the websites for both the Southern California Edison, the proponent in this action, as well as the CPUC, or California Public Utilities Commission office. And you may submit general questions to their websites, any specific questions that are directed to BLM, and they will be shared with SCE as well and coordinated to respond to your inquiry. For more information, here's the BLM e-planning website for the Ivanpah-Control transmission line project. Here you will find and be able to download the plan of development, maps, visual simulations, and other documents to better inform you and others. Should you wish to receive future updates and notifications regarding the Ivanpah-Control project, kindly submit your request to the project's email shown here. Please add our email to your address to avoid our responses being sent to your spam box. And with that, I wish this concludes our public scoping meeting. On behalf of the Bureau of Land Management, we thank you for your participation here today and taking the time to patiently listen to our presentation and ask questions about the Ivanpah-Control project. We wish you all a very good evening. Take care and stay well. Thank you.